Hey folks, with us today, Chris from Knapsack. Chris, super happy to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's stoked to be here.
All righty, let's start with the most important thing. What problem does your company solve?
Yeah, we are all about the place where design and engineering meets. And so when you think about the need to scale the production process for digital applications, you have this problem that exists particularly at large companies where it's not about hiring more engineers or about hiring more designers. It's about how do we make those people work more effectively together. And there's always been this process in the production of a digital product where you go from something that is design, which is the realm of intent, into code, which is the realm of production. And that process has traditionally been really fraught and really difficult. And Knapsack helps make design to code easier, more efficient, and more scalable for big enterprise.
Amazing. I would love to jump right into where it started because in 2017 to 2020, you had an agency which basically attacked the same problem. I would love for you to tell us a bit more about that and then how you turned being an agency owner into the actual SaaS company it is today.
Yeah, sure. So it actually started a little before the agency. As you can probably imagine, we had to have an idea before we had a company.
True.
My co-founder Evan and I, we used to work together at another mid-sized digital agency, and in that place we worked predominantly on CMS platforms, and so we worked with things like Drupal and WordPress and whatnot. And as a part of that process, we would build these platforms that were all about like how do you create a scalable CMS across hundreds or thousands of sites, and that was really where we first experienced the pain of this issue where. Yes, you could have a common web platform like Drupal and you could run hundreds of sites on Drupal, but you still had this design to code problem that existed for every single site you did. And very often there was a blocker in that process that was about backend development. You had to have the CMS stood up and you had to have it producing some sort of HTML elements that you could then style. And so what our systems-based approach sort of grew out of was this idea of how do you create an abstraction that you can sort of use to get a jump on front-end development before back-end development was ever done with what they were working on. And so sort of born out of that pain, we started to create these abstractions that you could pass variables or properties to during build time and create multiple different websites using the same front-end code. And so we didn't know at the time what this was called. We called it component-driven development. That phrase is not as fashionable anymore. Everybody talks about it in terms of design systems these days. And so when we started Basalt, which was the name of our agency, that agency was really focused on how do we build these highly customized systems that operate at scale, that let people effectively have an abstraction of their UI that they can then use for any product in their ecosystem.
Who was the typical customer back when you had the agency?
So it was still big enterprise predominantly. That's who we were used to selling to. Like Evan and I together, we built websites for Major League Soccer, for Johnson & Johnson, for Estee Lauder, Red Hat, like all the big enterprise companies. And so, if there was a website in media or tech that you'd visited, we'd probably had a hand in that in some way. And so scale is kind of what we were used to. And so we pretty much worked with large enterprise from the jump. And so most of those organizations were at some stage of already having a system. But our sort of specialty was being able to make them function at scale. So instead of just having the ability to use a system for one team or one product, we could roll it out to your entire ecosystem. And that's what people kind of loved us for as an agency.
If you need to hire the right developers and ship fast, then React Squad is for you. A boutique agency that specializes in React and only works with fast growth startups. Get a 14-day risk-free trial and a transparent price of $95 per hour. Visit reactsquad.io to learn more.
Okay, and then how did you make nowadays you're venture-backed, you're close to 30 employees, but how did you initially get the software off the ground, basically?
So, COVID was really a big part of it. Like it was kind of our COVID silver lining is we had a fair amount of booked work as an agency, and we were, around a dozen people. And then COVID happened, and most of our work went away. We got 30-dayed on a lot of our contracts so that people would say like, hey, huge amount of uncertainty, big world changing event. We're just going to stop working with our agency partners. And we'd been exploring the idea of a product before that, but this was the burn the ships moment, so to speak, where there was really no going back. We weren't making enough money as an agency to really sustain ourselves, and we took a PPP loan from the federal government and used that to keep folks employed. And with a bunch of bench time and this desire to build a product in this space, that was sort of our way of getting launched. But it was a little bit deeper than that, in that when we were out in the agency land exploring what sort of products to attach ourselves to, we had been very involved in the open source project Pattern Lab for a long time, and that had its shortcomings. Most present of which was it was based in PHP. And then the second side of it was we started working with InVision on the design side using InVision TSM. And there were obvious shortcomings there because if you were an engineer, that product was certainly not for you. And then we also contributed reasonably heavily to Storybook. And we'd all used Storybook previously. We all loved Storybook, but the problem with Storybook is if you were anything other than a developer, it wasn't something you necessarily wanted to use in your daily workflow. And so we kind of started with this principle that everything has to be based in structured data. Everything has to work for both designers and engineers. And everything also has to support product creation at scale. And so that was the sort of origin idea for Knapsack as first principles. And that's what we set off to build with that PPP loan. We had some initial ideas of where the direction was going to head with that, but it was really that time period from about May of 2020 until September that we really kind of got our legs under us in terms of a product. And then, raised some money, and now here we are.
So you really made the best out of that not so happy start with COVID then.
It was wild, right? We got a little bit lucky in that our office lease happened to be up in May of that year. And so we were able to not renew our office lease, and we sold all our office furniture, and that paid for like a month or two of runway. We had some friends and family that really believed in us, and so we raised some money from our friends. My parents put in some money. A couple of employees put in money. And so that was sort of what sustained us until I was able to go out and get institutional capital. We had no idea if it was going to work. I mean, sitting down in June and July, there were some pretty scary moments there where, we didn't really have a product. We had the beginnings of a product and a really good idea, but we had very few customers, very little money coming in the door. And it was kind of like, all right, how do we get to a point where we can actually try this dream out? And, another funny day that'll live in infamy, January 6th, 2021 is when we got funded. And so we were watching the riot happening in Washington while closing our round. So we have this like weird sort of historical markers associated with our company's progress.
I mean, as we see now, it makes at least for a great start.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's one of the things that Evan, my co-founder, always jokes about is like whenever we're in this period of adversity and we're both just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? He's always like, well, what we're going to do is in about 5 years, we're going to write a book about this.
Sounds like a fair plan. But then let's maybe switch a bit from basically like from the company building side to more the tactical level. As one does, I stalked your website. So it's basically book demo only. So I assume that you go after at least mid-market or enterprise.
Yeah.
How does your go-to-market look like?
Yeah, so the self-service demo is a constant question mark for us, and a big part of the reason why it's hard to say like go try Knapsack by clicking a button on our website is because we're really deeply integrated to code workflows, and so we connect to your Git provider, be that GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or whatever you have, and we work actually with your production code. And so that typically requires more than a push button setup to be able to have that function. And so go to market for us is pretty heavily enterprise focused because that's where a lot of the pain is. Knapsack is great for a single team, single product, but it really shines when you have multiple products and multiple teams using the software in some sort of concert. And what that tends to look like is it tends to look like somebody that has a design and engineering problem. Be that on the design side, it's usually somebody that is a senior individual contributor that is like, hey, our design's a mess. We're having a hard time getting the stuff that we're building in Figma to actually look like production. Or it's an engineer that is like, our design files are all over the place. We can't get organized. Nobody knows what to build. And the fidelity of what we're doing in design isn't matching what we actually need to be able to build something in production. And those are the people we typically start. And those early conversations are all about how we solve that sort of system level pain. And then that usually moves on to somebody in product. And that person in product tends to be the lightning rod or focal point of that design to engineering handoff problem. We have really, as an industry, punished our product people with the need to unify design and engineering in one place. And oftentimes they're the ones that feel the pain most acutely. And so usually those product people are responsible for one or more products and one or more product teams. And that's who we were really able to show, hey, we can solve this design to code problem for you. And most of the time people don't believe us. They say, first of all, hey, that's never a problem I thought I could ever solve. And then secondly, I didn't know you could solve that not just for one product, but for every product in my ecosystem. And so when we get a big customer that is looking at Knapsack really seriously, we tend to talk about the system, the design system, as the strategic asset that is most valuable to their product production process. And that's what starts to sort of change people's minds. It's not about just solving for design. It's not about just solving for engineering. It's about solving for the orchestration of your product efforts company-wide. And statements like, can you imagine if all your UI was unified into a single system, regardless of what language you're using, React or Angular or Ember, PHP or whatever. And then any team could pick that up, use it, and then also contribute to it and leave it better than when they found it. And that tends to be a really powerful message.
Interesting. And then how long are the sales cycles for something like that? Because it feels like you really have a ton of stakeholders you need to get aligned basically so that they move forward.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody has veto power these days inside of big organizations. And so, most of the time, our sales cycle is like 4 to 8 months. And most of those organizations have been talking to us that enter our pipeline for about a year. And so, it's all about timing is really the thing in market. So at any given time, we're talking to a couple of dozen different organizations that are large enterprises about what we do, about our value, about how we show up for them. But for whatever reason, be it budget cycles or timeline or internal resource allocation, they're not ready yet. And so it's really our biggest qualification is around timing. Are you going to pursue this? Is this a priority for this calendar year? Is this something that you're going to stand up inside of the next 6 months? And when people start to answer yes to those questions, we know that they're already interested in Knapsack because they've seen a demo, they've played with the software, they've touched it. But it's finally reached a point where they're ready to move forward in some capacity, whatever that is. And that's usually when we know, we have a qualified prospect that is really fundamentally interested in using our software.
And then do you have quota-carrying sales guys who run that, or are you still running that yourself, you or your co-founder?
Yeah, I mean, we have now 2 sales guys. And so it's, that early stage beginning of scale, right? So I have a go-to-market lead who is kind of like a co-founder. I mean, Andrew's been here for a very long time. And, we trust him not just with, top-line revenue, but also supporting customers and expanding customers. And so everything on sort of the go-to-market side of the house is his domain. And he does a lot of personal selling, as do I. But we've really kind of figured out how to get account executives up and running. We figured out how our top of funnel looks for that early nurture and customer acquisition, all the way through qualification and now to close. And so we feel like we have a pretty predictable process for how we get these large enterprises to get signed up on Knapsack. And now it's about just beginning the early bits of scale there.
How many people were you when you first hired the first salesperson?
So we were 9, I believe. And honestly, it was a little bit of a blunder on our part. We we started hiring salespeople a little over a year ago, and we simultaneously paired that with a modification of our strategy. And then we thought about, what did a self-service offering look like? What would it be like if people could spin up Knapsack on their own? And it led to a pretty frustrating experience for users because of the problems I mentioned earlier. Like, okay, great, I have Knapsack connected to my Git repository, but I can't get my CI to work. I can't get my software to build. And we would spend countless hours supporting customers, trying to get them to be able to build software on what was effectively like trying to be a self-service product, but wasn't. And we paired that with a sales motion that was intended to really like shepherd people across the line in more of a product-led capacity. And it didn't work very well. And so about a year ago now, we changed that strategy and refocused on enterprise, rebuilt the sales and go-to-market team. And that's been very successful for us. It's completely changed things around.
For the people listening who might be in a similar situation, what do you think are the criteria of a product that is is a better fit for enterprise? Because yes, PLG is all the rage nowadays, self-service is amazing, but I mean, for example, your solution is quite powerful, thus also quite complex. So now having like the opportunity to look at the hindsight, what could you have seen earlier, which others who are in that spot might be able to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were two parts to it, right? Is go where the pain is for your customers. There was this moment where I was actually walking around by the river in Hood River, and my account executive called me. And he was like, the problem that I keep having with these deals that we're doing for $10,000, $20,000, $25,000 is that the pain isn't really there. There's no urgency in these conversations. There's nothing that shows me that these people need this software and it's going to be priority 1 or priority 2 for them. And so that was a real kind of eye-opening moment where I was like, okay, so my sales guy is telling me that our customers don't have enough pain. And salespeople are generally optimists about a customer being willing or wanting to buy. And so he's in all these different conversations and he's like, there's just not enough urgency in these chats. And so that was a big moment for me to realize that we don't have the right market target. And then I'd say the second side of it is don't dogfight with your competitors. In early stage companies, there has to be room in the market, right? And we compete with folks like Supernova and Cerohite, and I generally really wish them well because they're in a different part of the market than we are. We run into them competitively, but most of the time, our real true competition is custom, and it should be, because that's the segment of the market that we want to target. And we've actually started as a part of our sales conversations saying like, hey, look, if you are just looking for a documentation solution, or you're looking for a multi-point solution, or you don't have the amount of money to spend, like $50K plus that Knapsack really costs, here's our competitors. Go use them. They have a different product that has a different sort of scale to it and fits a different use case. And so that may be a better product for you. And that serves two purposes. That basically shows them that we understand our competition. And it also shows them that we're different than them because our focus is that large enterprise customer that is going to have that complexity and that need to really build something for scale.
How do you build the like a very tactical question. How do you build the lead engine in a way for your sales team? Meaning like the top of funnel first touch that a enterprise has with you, is that via inbound and content, code outbound? How do you initially get in the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a largely ABM based strategy. And so what we tend to do is we tend to say like, all right, who are the right kind of customers for us to acquire? And we look at it usually around industry because it's easy to build like microsites and marketing content for an industry more than it is for every single company. But that varies a little bit. And what we do is we tend to spin up microsites for each target in our ABM. And those microsites are relatively customized to the people that we're targeting. And then we do some list builds and some outbound. And, there's this really cool AI-enabled process that goes and, generates AI-driven emails to go convert people, et cetera, et cetera. But mostly what we're caring about is generating interest. And so where we really measure success in top of funnel is conversions around content. And so the content that we're producing is stuff like our podcast. It's things like our, the recent wrap we did around Figma's Config conference. And what people are trying to do is they're still trying to understand like what's standard operating procedure look like in building a design system or building a practice inside of my organization. And we tend to focus it on more senior buyers. And so we're trying to put out content that is about strategy, content that's about strategic value, content that's
more
about
on the VP level, or what's the level or the hierarchy typically?
Director and above. Because if people are ICs, they're going to find us. Like everybody that's out there Googling design systems platform that actually knows what the words design systems are, like that's something that like they're innately going to find us. What we really want to try to do is we want to try to get those strategic buyers, the people that have the money and the political capital inside of organizations to make these larger organization buys. We want them to know who we are. And we also want them to understand why a design system is one of the most valuable things that they can invest in.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And I mean, this is also sort of what sets us apart from the PLG side of things too, right? Like the dirty little secret of PLG is PLG actually requires a pretty big sales. Like, you're basically saying like, let's create let's do our point of sale or the point that we engage in a sales process much, much earlier in a cycle. And that earlier push into that sales cycle means that you get a lot of at-bats, but your PLG motion has to be pretty refined to get that conversion up high enough that you don't have a bunch of salespeople basically like, doing internal selling to your potential PLG customers. And so there is a lot of investment in go-to-market that is required from a personnel standpoint to really drive early PLG. And so what's great is like with one salesperson effectively, and yes, a BD person and a marketing person too, but with a very small go-to-market team, the ability to target the right kind of enterprise accounts, have a very high conversion rate and a very high win rate on those accounts. And then also be able to position ourselves where we're usually the only people in that sale. It's a pretty powerful motion.
And the churn is way better compared to like mid-market or the SMBs.
Exactly. And so we don't actually really have to worry about churn very much. I mean, it's there, right? It's present. But it's definitely one of those things that most of the time what we're talking about in terms of like net dollar retention is something that's, 140% plus, because we have customers that use our software in some limited capacity, either as a proof of concept or as a long-term trial. And then they're willing to expand organization-wide after 6 months to a year. And so we get these awesome expansion opportunities within big customers because they've been able to use our software and we've proven the value out for them.
Switching to today, what are you currently thinking and strategizing? What is the next one step or two steps you're planning on doing? Because I always love to talk about the big vision, but in the end, it comes down to, okay, what are we going to execute like next quarter, basically? So what's in your mind right now?
So next quarter, we have a big focus on AI right now. Like everybody does, right? But hey, we're living in an AI-enabled world now as of, 9-ish months ago. And so in that capacity, there's a lot around design system discovery that is really critical. So when you create a design system, you're basically creating a novel length work of content that doesn't really have a great table of contents or really great index. And so how do you have an AI assistant that you can ask questions about how you use your design system or what's in your design system? How does that or a similar AI agent help you generate that content? So automatically document my props for me, automatically describe the do's and don'ts of a button or any common bit of UI. We all like to pick the button because it's a great punching bag. And then there's another part of it that is about when you actually have that AI that's there, how do you actually get it to generate things based on the components that exist in your system? And this kind of goes from the short term to the long term here. When we talk about the ability to actually compose things with UI in a design system, what we're really talking about is being able to run a design process inside a code medium. The biggest weakness of something like Figma and the biggest challenge I saw at Config was exactly what the CTO from 37 Signals, or Hey, name escapes me at the moment, wrote in a post as a follow-up, is that no matter what, if we're designing in something that isn't the medium it's destined for, that isn't producing code that is usable in production, we're designing it in an abstraction. And there will always be a handoff process between that design effort and then something that actually creates the real product, unless you're able to actually build and design in the same place. And that's what we ultimately want to get to with Knapsack is maybe not like to wholesale replace Figma, but to be able to run a design process in the medium it's destined for. Let me use my coded components to actually construct something and build something. And in my opinion, that's an innately AI-enabled process. You need to be able to say, like to an AI or to an agent, this is what I want to create, and have it give you a starting place for that, and then allow you to refine it from there. And that is this really powerful idea that we have that kind of represents the future of our company. Is what if instead of having to have a better managed design to code handoff process, you didn't have to have that handoff process at all? And that's what we would definitely be the future as.
How are you currently executing on that? Did you hire like an AI specialist, or how are you making that strategic move?
Yeah, I mean, AI specialist is such a funny thing right now, right? It's like prompt engineer, et cetera, right? Hey, all this stuff is so new, but like, and there's like 25 people in the world that actually really know what happens behind the scenes. Yeah, I mean, we have some great advisors, and we know some folks at some of the big AI companies that we spend a lot of time talking with in a very academic context about like what is the future of user interfaces and stuff like that. But from a practical standpoint, we hired a couple of people that really love to tinker with AI. And has spent a bunch of time doing things like creating, AI-based robot assistants that walk around their house and talk to them, or, AI-modified Zoom backgrounds, or, one of the favorite things is one of our developers wrote a bot that fed the Design Systems podcast into it, and now I can respond to questions about the Design Systems podcast using my own voice, which is really creepy. But at the same time, like, that's the sort of experimentation that we need right now, right? It's not about necessarily knowing the end state or end solution, because I don't think that there's been enough time yet for this to percolate, but it's about experimenting with interesting directions and kind of seeing what works. And it's the part of the company where I feel most like we're sort of wandering around right now. But that's okay. Like, we need a good wander to get to the right solution here in product. And in the meantime, we have a product that's selling well and doing really well based on its current generation. And so we're in a really great spot where the company's growing. There's people that find a lot of value in using Knapsack now. And then we're starting to build these incremental things on top of it that help connect people's workflows and make the things they need to do in design systems much, much easier, while we experiment with this interesting future.
I love that the vision is to go head to head against Figma in the enterprise. But before we wrap up, where can people find you, and especially your podcast, so that the people who really are into design systems can get it?
Yeah, so I spend some time on LinkedIn here and there. So Chris Strahl LinkedIn/Chris Strahl.
We will link that below.
Yeah, something like that. And then at Chris Strahl on Twitter, though I'm not there as much as I used to be. The Design Systems Podcast at the DS Pod. And then our website, knapsack.cloud, and our LinkedIn page.
Chris, it was a pleasure to have you on.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Nikolas. This has been great.
If you like this episode, then you'll love the SaaS Operator, a weekly newsletter brought to you by Early Node, with actionable insights from SaaS experts in the industry delivered right to your inbox every Tuesday for free. Visit earlynode.com to subscribe.